Good morning, everybody. Welcome to, I think, day 2 of the Northern Housing Consortium's annual summit. And today we've got a fantastic breakout session, which is focused on regional approaches to climate change, decarbonisation and sustainability. And we'll be learning more about what's happening West Yorkshire through the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership, North East England Climate Coalition and Greater Manchester Housing Providers. So I'm Daniel Barrett, Head of Energy and Environment at West Yorkshire Combined Authority. And it's a real pleasure for me to join the conference today for the first time. Also speaking today will be Martin Broadest, Samantha Granger and Bojar, and they'll be really setting out how they are working in their regions to address and tackle the climate emergency. As we go through, please submit any questions that you have into the chat, and at the end of the 3 presentations, then there'll be a Q&A and more open discussion, so you can ask a question then. If you do want to ask a question, please raise your virtual hand. That'll be really helpful too. So yeah, looking forward to a good session. This session is looking to run for just shy of an hour. So I think we'll kick off with Martin, just to say a little bit about who Martin is. So he's an Executive Director of Connect Housing in West Yorkshire and a lead responsibility for development, asset management, maintenance, customer services, and more recently, the association's work on the climate emergency. He's also a climate emergency lead for the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership, so he's very much the right person to be talking about climate change. And is a commissioner on the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission, which is an independent advisory body set up to bring actors from the public, private and third sectors together to support and guide ambitions and climate actions across the region. He's passionate about how collaboration must be at the centre of housing sector's work on climate and how we can lead the transformation needed in the built environment. So welcome, Martin, and over to you.
Thanks, Daniel. Right, I'm going to try the first challenge of sharing my screen, which I think hopefully you can see now.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks to the Northern Housing Consortium for the invitation to come and speak to you all this morning. I'm just going to move things around. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing in the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership and how, Daniel's already said how collaboration is at the centre of that. I think and the C word, collaboration, is something you're going to hear a lot of this morning from all the speakers. So first of all, the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership formed about 2 years ago. It was in recognition of the emerging devolution agenda and in anticipation of the election of the first West Yorkshire Mayor, who was Tracy Bravian, who was elected in May this year. It's formed by the 10 larger housing associations who are headquartered in West Yorkshire, plus the 2 local authorities with retained housing stock indirect management, which are Leeds and Kirklees. And altogether, the partnership represents around 175,000 homes across the West Yorkshire sub-region. As part of its first year of work, the partnership created a prospectus aligning itself specifically to the issues that the mayoral candidates showed that they were interested in. Each of the 5 ambitions shown on the slide here has been translated into a priority work stream, and I lead on the work stream 2, the climate emergency one, on behalf of the partnership. Now, last year, the West Yorkshire Combined Authority adopted a comprehensive plan to retrofit the housing stock in West Yorkshire by 2038 and get it to net zero. It's called the Scaling Up Better Homes Yorkshire Plan. It's quite a dense read. It's 70 odd pages of academically based research, but it's very comprehensive and it's very well thought through, and it provides a very sensible staged approach to getting to where we need to in the next 17, 18 years. The plan identified that there are over 1 million homes producing 3 million tonnes of CO2 per year in West Yorkshire. And if we're going to get to net zero by 2038, that represents a 14.5% year-on-year CO2 reduction. About a fifth of the homes are owned by social landlords. And the plan also recognised the huge challenge there is with the underdeveloped supply chain and skills shortages in the industry, at all parts of the industry, something that is obviously not unique to West Yorkshire. The plan provides a clear policy approach and sets out the potential financing model to support it. And that's not just for financing model for social housing, but across all tenures. The plan aims to build confidence amongst the building owners to invest, and amongst the contracting, supply chains, manufacturers and training providers to support that whole process. Now, I mentioned collaboration at the head of my comments, and certainly in the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership, we're putting a lot of energy into collaborating on the climate agenda. But we also recognise through the Scaling Up plan that as social housing providers, we're major stakeholders in communities and are an important actor in developing cross-tenure approaches at a neighbourhood level to addressing climate change. And that net zero neighbourhood concept is a key driver for the plan. So we're not just looking at collaboration between housing providers and in terms of the social housing sector. We're also looking outside the sector as well to see how we can support the wider retrofit agenda in our communities. So what have we been focusing on so far? So firstly, we've been gathering together our stock data from across the partnership to build up a picture of what we have, where and how energy efficient or otherwise it is. Now, the aim here is to identify the collective scale of the challenge, to attack the problem strategically and to see where there are opportunities to work together at a local level. And from this, we aim to share our knowledge and resources and help create a regional retrofit hub concept. Again, something that the plan is, the Scaling Up plan is very keen to see happen. And that can act as a driver for wider community engagement. Secondly, we're looking to develop a large-scale solar and battery storage pilot on between 1,000 and 2,000 homes, whereby we'll use the income generated from selling the energy at preferential rates to our tenants and on a business-to-business basis to generate a return on the capital employed. Basically, in other words, self-funding PV without feed-in tariff. Now, the concept is based on a small-scale pilot that's been running by Together Energy Services over in Blackburn for the last year or so. And we're at the early stages of working up the business plan to be able to roll that out across, as I said, the large-scale pilot. Thirdly, we're focusing attention on workforce development, both to broaden the understanding of climate issues generally through initiatives such as the Carbon Literacy Training Programme, but also to skill up our teams on past 2035 retrofit processes. Now, it's all still in early days, but there are lots of good things starting to happen across the partnership. And finally, the thing that's taken up quite a little bit of time over the last couple of months has been that we've put together a large-scale collaborative bid to the Wave 1 of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that now. So the headlines of the bid are that we had 9 housing providers involved and the combined authority as the lead bidding partner, because we needed to go through a local authority for Wave 1. Altogether, there were over 1,800 measures on 1,300 properties, and all but 5 of the properties will be improved from level D, E and F up to level C. Altogether, we estimate that it will save our tenants over £300,000 a year in energy bills, and will save over nearly 2.5 million kilowatt hours in energy. We're estimating that it will support 185 jobs in the supply chain and create an estimated 5 new apprenticeships. And altogether, the project's worth £10.3 million with a grant ask of £5 million. It was a pretty significant undertaking to pull all that together, and if you'd have asked me at the beginning of the process how we would get on, I wouldn't have been as optimistic as it's turned out. I've been very, very pleasantly surprised at the degree of collaboration and input everybody's been able to do, and I think we've achieved a great result with the bid, and hopefully it will win favour with the evaluation teams, and we'll get the funding announcement in January. Fingers crossed. So a little bit on challenges and opportunities. I'm going to use my three-legged stool analogy here. I see the retrofit challenge for social housing as being as like a three-legged stool. We have technical challenges, we have financial challenges, and there are community challenges. I think the technical challenges in terms of what we need to do to our homes to get them to net zero, I think probably we know 90% of what the solutions are there from a technical point of view. Yes, there are lots of challenges in how to organise that and the skills that we're going to need to deliver it, but fundamentally, we know how to insulate homes, we know how to install low carbon heating systems, we you know the issue is about planning and delivering it. In terms of finances, we've all been grappling with our business plans in the last year or two to identify how we pay for this, and probably maybe we're across the sector halfway to understanding how we can fund the retrofit work we need to do. There are still huge gaps in the business plan, and from the conversations I've been having with people, most people are just flagging those as gaps that will be addressed at some point in the future. But I think the biggest question mark and the biggest thing we have yet to really get to grips on is how we engage the community, how we take our customers with us, and indeed our staff with us on this journey. And I think for me, that is the biggest challenge of the three. And I really welcome that the work that was done by the Tenant Climate Journey and their report that was launched on Tuesday as a valuable contribution towards that. And we all need to recognise the scale of the work that we need to do in relation to our community engagement. Now, like I think most housing associations, and like I've been focusing this morning so far, we're focusing on the challenge of getting our stock to net zero and retrofit. But for me, that's just one of the challenges that the climate emergency throws up. And this is where really my work with the Climate Commission is really informing our discussions at the partnership. So yes, retrofit is one of the key challenges in getting our buildings to net zero. But alongside that, we also have adaptation and resilience. As we've seen in the news this week through COP, climate change is already affecting countries across the world, some more so than others, and some climate change is baked in, and we are going to have to adapt and become more resilient to the challenges that throws up. I don't think we've really started to think about that across the sector yet. Thirdly, a just transition. It's a fact of life that those people with the smallest carbon footprints are likely to be those who are most adversely impacted by climate change, and also are likely to be the least able to protect themselves from it. And whether that's people in sub-Saharan Africa, or whether it's the tenants on our estates who have low incomes and unstable incomes, the truth is the same, whichever. And we need to use our influences to be able to make sure that our tenants aren't left behind, that the communities that we work in aren't left behind, and that the transition to a low carbon economy is a just one which they benefit from. And finally, something that we can do as owners of large estates is actually make sure that we improve the biodiversity and protect nature as part of the work we're doing. It's all very well if we manage to save the planet from overheating through greenhouse gases, but if in the process we ignore the impact on biodiversity, and then the planet will die in other ways, and we need to look after the planet. They are not mutually exclusive. And those four things are all the themes that the Yorkshire Humber Climate Commission has been focusing on. And next week at its own climate summit at the Royal Armouries in Leeds, it's going to be launching its action plan for the region. And I'd encourage you all to download that when it's launched and have a look. It's a comprehensive call for action across sectors for the region. And just to finish off, there's some links to some of the things I've referred to today, so you can. I'm sure the slides will be circulated, and you'll be able to look up those and read them for your own interest. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Absolutely fantastic, and I thought the way that you framed the agenda beyond just net zero and energy efficiency was really, really helpful. So let's move on to Samantha. A little bit about Samantha. So she's head of environmental sustainability at 13, which is a she leads a team of specialists who are driving the organisation's plans to reduce its environmental impact. She's directing their strategic direction on that. She's delivering and leading on the delivery and development of decarbonisation, assets, energy use, and climate change adaptation. To support this journey, 13's Take Control campaign will see the organisation achieve its goals to become a much greener organisation. We're focused on adding value through initiatives such as tackling fuel poverty, certainly putting customers first. Okay, so over to you, Samantha. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Daniel. Okay, hi everyone. I apologise in advance. I've got a bit of a cold, so I will mute myself if I start to cough. So I'm going to talk to you today about the housing retrofit workstream of the North East Climate Coalition, and also about another group that I'm part of, which is the North East Carbon Group, and some of the work we've been doing there. Some of you may be aware of NECO. It's a cross-sector initiative which is focusing work regionally, looking at how we can tackle climate change, reverse ecological collapse, and deliver urgent and trust transition. Really what NECO is looking to do is bring together all of the good work that is already happening across the North East. It's not about duplication, but more about sharing good practice, so identifying where there's positive examples and sharing them across the sectors, but where different sectors can come together and learn from one another. So the health sector, working with the built environment, working with housing, etc. Looking at collective planning and delivery, so we can get a regional wide approach, look at what's right for sectors, but again, learning from one another as we go. And looking at how regional activities have got put across. I'm part of the retrofit group. You'll see there on the presentation, there are 4 groups that have been established so far, and one of them is the housing retrofit. So the housing retrofit group has representatives from across the region, both from the north of the region and Teesside, LEPs, multiple local authorities, registered providers across the North East, and the North East Yorkshire Energy Hub. And it is actually headed up by the Northern Housing Consortium, who bring us all together and keep us on track. The focus of the group is really... Get over there, dickhead. Oh, it wasn't me. The focus of the stream really is tackling what needs to be done to retrofit our homes across the region, and making sure that we we meet high standards of energy efficiency, but also tackling the fuel poverty, making sure we're not making our homes more expensive for our customers, and a transition to zero net carbon heating. What I'm most focused on as well is if we're not just looking at the retrofitting of social landlord homes or local authority owned homes, this is the entire housing sector. So we are working to bring with us the local authority, the homeowners, private landlords, which we know is not going to be an easy thing to do, but it is something that, we are understanding the scale of the challenge, basically. So the initial focus has really been to understand the scale of the challenge. We've drafted a retrofit plan, which the presentation just gives you an understanding there of what it is, what the structure is about. But we're trying to understand the individual, what's the demand for the technology? How are we going to provide certainty for the supply chain? How are we going to establish, investment and the capacity and the skills? and how we're going to reduce costs through economies of scale, which we can then drive through to the other sectors. So in support of this, we've been given some funding from the North East Yorkshire Energy Hub to do some research with Northumbria University. The research aims is really to understand the current energy performance of the stock as a whole, predominantly with the Northern Housing Consortium members, explore the plans and strategies already in place, what are we doing to decarbonise, what are we doing to retrofit, and how can that information support our supply chains, where can we understand where the gaps are, and look at where there is potential for acceleration, with the announcement of the funding streams that are coming up, where can we work together? Initial results of that were already presented at the Regional Retrofit Summit in September. This was organised by Low Carbon Homes. It was a great event, and we had speakers from across the region, and some of you may have been there. We had North of Tyne Mayor was there, Jamie Driscoll. We had Bays there talking about the decarbonisation fund. And we also had Jill Dawson and Dr. Lara Hipwood discussing the outcomes of the funding so far. Across the 3 days, we did have a really good representation from local authorities, and they actually made up the majority of the people attending, followed by housing associations, manufacturers and suppliers. And we are looking to repeat that work next year with the NECO members. And again, to focus on what we've done so far. What I'd like to draw some attention to is another group that I'm part of, which is the North East Carbon Group. Apologies, anyone's on the call of mugshot I've put on the screen there. But this is a group that we established back in March last year. It was just as I'd moved into my current role as Head of Environmental Sustainability. I was looking around to see what other people were doing in the region. We were looking to pull together our approach at 13. I'm very conscious that, the sector's got a great reputation for sharing knowledge and learning from one another. So basically just opened up a session inviting other local authorities to send over whoever they'd given the job of sorting out their environmental sustainability to this group. Prosper, who we work with on a procurement level, they helped us to pull the group together. And really over the last year, we've focused quite a lot on understanding the real challenges. It's a real member-led agenda. It's not something that, I pull together the agenda or anything. People actually, put forward what they want to talk about. Most of the focus over the last year has been on decarbonisation, the wider issues around understanding our scopes of our emissions and what we need to do to tackle them as a business. We've shared a lot when it's come to finance, concerns over future regret from installations, and understanding how we can get better engagement and buy-in for our customers. From this group, there's been a real openness to share and learn, great collaboration. More recently, we've been supporting one another and sharing our thoughts and experience of the social housing decarb application, which has been really helpful. And I think from the conversations from that, we've seen that there is a real passion and desire to work collaboratively and come together. But what we need in order to make that successful is some really strong leadership. We need to see the leaders within the North East really coming together and taking the lead on that and looking at how we can develop a place approach and just not so much talking about what we're going to do, but actually start pushing it forward and see some of those collaborations. And I am hopeful that the social housing decarb wave 1 is going to start that off. And ours, that as we move into wave 2, we can develop bigger and better and more collaborative approach to decarbonisation. And that's it from me. I'll hand you back to Daniel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Samantha. Really enjoyed that, and I really like the way that you present the sort of co-benefits around energy efficiency, fuel poverty, alleviation and clean heating, and how it should be very much around reducing demand, bills, emissions, and creating better homes for people. So thank you so much. So finally, let's move on to Peter. So a little bit about Peter. So Peter leads the Growth and Assets Director at Great Places Housing Group, which is 24,000 homes in more than 30 local authority areas. So busy guy. He's responsible for its affordable market sales and market rent development programs, sales, sustainable asset investment, repairs, building safety and carbon reduction. And a little bit about his background. So he's a graduate from Sheffield Polytechnic and has worked in the housing sector since 1989. So he knows all about it. And he started his career in housing management before moving into development. He's also been involved in a lot of significant and very successful regeneration schemes in the Northwest. So over to you, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. So a lot of what I'm going to say has probably already been said in terms of very similar approaches across the different sub-regions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Greater Manchester housing providers. Can I have the next slide, please? So GMHP, as I'll be referring them to, is 25 housing providers established in 2010. So quite a long track record of collaborative working in the GMCA environment. We own or manage about 250,000 homes in Greater Manchester, of which there are 9 local authorities. So anybody familiar with Greater Manchester will know that Stockport dropped out last year or the year before. So there's 9 local authorities, GVA of 1.2 billion per annum. We have 30,000 jobs secured through our direct work in Greater Manchester, and crucially, we're most of us are fairly substantial developers, depending on size, appetite, program. So we've throughout our kind of carbon collaboration, let's say, there's the backdrop of plans to build 17,000 new homes in the next 5 years. We've probably built about 6,000 or 7,000 in the past 3 years, and we want to contribute to the 50. We want to achieve the 50k target in GM by 2037. That's 50k of affordable housing completions amongst 165,000 completions across the board in Greater Manchester. That's the target. Next slide, please. So in this slide, I give a little bit of the context, which I won't go into, because I think we've already had some of this, particularly through Martin. Across those 250,000 homes, we reckon that it's going to cost about £6 billion to retrofit them all down to zero carbon, which is obviously pie in the sky, really. When we think about some of the other opportunities that will come up, that should come up over the next decade or so, in terms of decarbonisation of the electricity grid, potential for offsetting, and obviously we need to put this in the context of, we do have not many, but we do have some incredibly difficult to treat properties that we'd be mad. We'd be frankly mad to spend the potential cost of decarbonising to zero carbon. And in any case, some of our homes, I'm sure this goes for many housing organisations, it will be pretty much impossible to do. So within that, we obviously need, I suppose I'm alluding to, a very risk-based approach to how we prioritise the decarbonisation. It's got to be top of our agenda now. It's absolutely got to be. But there are a number of other priorities that vie for top spot. Obviously, we're the GMHP housing organisations are all providers of core services, supporting vulnerable families, supporting family members into work and training, etc., etc. The usual very important stuff that housing associations do. We've got some big building safety bills coming up and already ongoing across GMHP, which a lot of housing organisations have got at the moment, and we all, as I said, have aims around new homes. So decarbonisation is one of 4. It's got to be up there. It's got to be part of our our collaborative approach, but also, as I think Martin said, it's so important that we bring our, particularly our colleagues along with us, understanding the priorities of the organisations, and definitely understanding that we can't do everything all at once. So for many organisations in GMHP, we're in the collaboration is about understanding, is about data collection at the moment, is about planning for a plan, if you want, for delivery of decarbonisation. Because we all know that at the moment we're dealing with significant building safety issues that over the next couple of years should be resolved, and we should be into kind of business as usual under the new building safety legislation. But in terms of the improvements that are needed, fire stopping, alarms, etc., that's a very real issue for housing associations at the moment. So that's part of the context. So just whistling through these, obviously we know that grant funding isn't going to be available to come along and save us all in the housing association sector. It's more focused on difficult to treat and exemplars. So we're going to have to find this money ourselves, and just highlight here, there's a risk of wasting a lot of money. We've talked a lot about not being early adopters, not being pioneers, but that can't be an excuse for doing nothing. But the learning we need to draw on, we'll all have had been involved in eco homes in the past, windmills that never worked properly and we had to take them down, or actually ended up sucking more electricity out of the grid than they were putting in, etc. So we need to learn from that, but we need to keep that motivation and enthusiasm. I won't go into the maze of unknowns. Obviously, there are lots of them at this stage. And in one of the outcomes of the research we've done in Greater Manchester is the complication of the varied stock typologies that we have: pre-1919 stock, pre-war stock, and then into some of the interwar properties. They all bring along different carbon requirements and potentially different approaches. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the obvious big elements of our context is around our customers. And again, Martin mentioned this, so I won't go into it in great detail. But in terms of the collaborative approach that I'm going to describe in Greater Manchester, we have one of the major work streams is around customers. It's around our tenants. Obviously, we deal with a lot of lower income and disadvantaged groups. They contribute least to climate change, but are probably going to be hardest hit. And we're seeing some of that at the moment in terms of gas prices and electricity prices, energy prices in particular. And we need to ensure that their voices don't go unheard in this process, that we bring them along with us. They have an opportunity to influence, because this will the eventual approach through retrofit will inevitably change the kind of MO of their lives, and we need to ensure that we bring them with us on our journey. They understand why, and to be honest, it's people like our customers who are key to, as Boris would say, getting climate change done. So very important to us and a major part of the work stream. So next slide, please. And this is the Greater Manchester pathway to zero carbon. So the actual combined authority, these are their priorities. Obviously, where we're involved, let's say, is around renewable energy generation on site, energy efficiency of domestic properties, and particularly around efficiency of heating and cooling buildings, and trying to shift away from fossil fuels. So next slide, please. So our approach, we have a decarbonisation task force, which sounds very grand, but that's the leads from various of the Greater Manchester housing providers, which just provides the kind of overview and makes sure that feet are being held to the fire in terms of how we bring, particularly at the moment, our data together, identifying opportunities, particularly for collaboration through that. So we've we've harnessed, I think, the initial drive for improvement. So we don't really have naysayers. We have very enthusiastic organisations that are seeking to understand cost together, share our plans, and share learning, because a number of organisations have done some deep retrofit pilots. Some are building to net zero new build, and some of us are particularly involved in off-site production of new homes. So the point is, through the infrastructure that we've got, which is the decarbonisation task force, and then more of a delivery group called the asset, I think it's that asset management group, we seek to build our data, understand our issues, and then start to deliver in terms of building programs together. So through that, engaging with the supply chain, building product and capacity, and in the way that we've done with a partnership around around off-site homes, is to actually end up engaging with the supply chain in a meaningful way, so they understand our issues and those of our customers, and we can hopefully build relationships that recognise our programs and recognise the particular idiosyncrasies of our stock types. And as I said earlier, bringing colleagues and customers with us, massively important. Next slide, please. So we have priority themes. The last three of these on this slide, it shouldn't be on there. They've just repeated from the previous slide. Sorry about that. So we have a work stream around data, building our data to forge understanding and joint working. We have a finance group. These are all fairly senior level groups. The finance one looks at the opportunities both from our own means as housing associations, and in terms of our investment plans, because obviously we've all got massive investment plans anyway for the next 30 years of our business plan. How can we use that better? How can we use that better to decarbonise? But also looking at external financing and grant. We have a communications group, which is about spreading the message and getting the language right. And then that customer engagement, it hasn't really got going yet, but that's got to be front and centre of what we do. And then an initiatives and learning groups. That's where we look at sharing across the organisations and the infrastructure of GMHP in order to develop new programmes. So next slide, please. So I won't go into this in detail, but suffice to say, a collaborative approach is key to this. And I think, as Martin said, that's going to be the kind of watchword for this session. Insofar as we've made a bid, or 10 of us have made a bid to the decarbonisation fund. For us, that's value of about 18.7 million, grant of about 9 million, covering it's nearly 1,300 homes and nearly 7,000 fabric measures to mostly EPC D and E properties. So that's the first kind of bit of the kind of the outcome of the collaboration so far. So we're all committed to working together. As I've said, there is a focused agreement on that, and it's top of our objective strategies, strategy objectives in the next few years. So I'm conscious of time. I've got a few more slides, but really it's more about kind of call to arms on collaboration. So I think I'll skip the next couple of slides and go to takeaways. Can I do that? Slide 10, fairly quickly. No, we're running out of time. So there we are. So for us, the view is the challenge is too great to address in isolation, and the recent NHF document, Decarbonisation of Guide for Housing Associations, really mirroring this approach. Too big to do in isolation. We've got to get the data right to not make mistakes we've made in the past, because this is about long term and it's about huge scale. It can't be an excuse for doing nothing. As I said, no choice but to prioritise decarbonisation. I think we've built that with Greater Manchester housing providers, that we're all taking this forward as corporate priority number one. Customers front and centre, and we're really focusing down on that. And one of the major challenges for housing associations that sometimes are, a bit competitive, particularly in development. Sharing can be difficult, but in terms of resolving or addressing decarbonisation, massive opportunity for us to build knowledge and then build programmes and deliver together. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Thank you so much. I think some of the takeaways for me from that were around how you're using collaboration to kind of understand your assets, and then also how do you prioritise decarbonisation alongside other priorities. And I was very much interested in how you talked about different housing typologies having different carbon footprints and solutions that are required to address them. Okay, we've got about 15 minutes for questions, so very much encouraging people on the call to come forward and ask questions. Perhaps if you can put your cameras on, that would make it a bit more human. And you can either put a question in the chat or and then ask it yourself, or I can ask it. I'm happy either way. But over to you now. This is your time, so please ask away. Okay, maybe I'll ask a question whilst you're warming up. And this is something that Martin and I have spoken about from a West Yorkshire perspective. But how much value do you see in, and Samantha touched on, I think, sort of political involvement in this agenda. How much value do you see as a kind of northern approach to climate change, and how we can use our metro mayors in particular to really help support this agenda? So I'd be interested to get some thoughts on that, because obviously we've got metro mayors in all the sort of main northern regions. So yeah, it'd be good to get people's thoughts on that from Martin, Sam, and
Shall I go first? I'm kind of in too much. There's more than anything else that I've come across in my 20 years working in housing associations. There's more talking and more collaboration, verbal collaboration going on around the climate emergency agenda than anything else by a long chalk, which is really great. But to follow the theme set by Greta Thunberg this week, we've got to turn words into action. And I think that's the next big challenge, and I think we're starting to see that now. I mean, Pete talked about the collaborative bid to put forward to Wave 1 in GM, and similarly I talked about what we've done in West Yorkshire. Those are, I've been describing that for us as the first step on a pathway towards hopefully longer term deals with government that will give us the funding certainty we need to be able to plan 5-10 years ahead rather than 5-10 months ahead, which is what currently we're having to do. There are discussions happening between regions now about how can we collaborate more, particularly around the mayoral, the metro mayor regions, and how can we kind of act together more as a collective voice, again with the aim of trying to influence policy. I mean, the last couple of weeks we've had the heat and building strategy, which is a step forward. I wouldn't say it's everywhere all the way we need to go, but it's a step forward at least. So things are happening, but I'm impatient, and we need to go a lot quicker.
As well, if I can, I think I would agree with Martin. We need to start seeing some action. I think as I'd said earlier, the social housing decarb wave one has started some of that action in Tees Valley. There's 4 of us come together to put forward a bid. But my question to us as a sector and across the region would be, would we have come together and done that bid collectively if we hadn't had to, because we had to have a local authority lead, or somebody had to take the lead? We've kind of had our hand forced, and it hasn't been an easy process. The initial research we've had with Northumbria University has showed that a lot of the associations are at different steps when it comes to our data.
You asked the question, I will tell you.
Our bid has certainly shown that as well, when we've brought the data together, that we're taking different approaches. And I think if we want to have some true cross-sector, collaborative working, we need to look at how we can align our approach. I think that will help the supply chain as well. If we can, everyone's different. We've all got different stock to do stuff too. But I think if we can do something and align our processes and our approach a bit better, then we'll have more of a fighting chance if we want to do something bigger and at scale. But it's going to take time, and I think we're possibly wave 2 may see a little bit more alignment, but it may be waves 3 or 4 before we see that true collaboration at a placemaking kind of level.
Thank you. Peter, a bit of reflection from yourself?
I just think that I agree with everything that's been said. I just think that we need to, as we say, turn our really nice collaborative slides and outcomes into something real and tangible. And I think it's down to us as housing providers to kind of almost clear the path and through actually demonstrable outcomes and telling the story with real substance behind us in terms of delivery. I think we've got to do that. We've got to be the kind of the organisations that sit behind the mayors and embolden them to actually take some of this forward at that level. But as been said by Sam and Martin, we're at the beginning of this journey. I've mentioned about building safety, particularly there's so many other priorities. That building the data, that understanding is so important to enable us to develop and acknowledge that this is a long-term plan. And we're not going to be able to say we've decarbonised our whole stock in the next 5 up to 10 years even. It's a journey, and it's telling that story as well as some of the wins that we do actually achieve together.
Okay. All right, thanks, Peter. I see that Shafiq has got his hand up, so please ask away. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, good morning, everyone. We all talked about long-term, medium, long-term plans, what's happening. My immediate question will be is, what kind of tenant do right now within the house accommodation deliver? No one has spoken about that yet. Is what a customer, tenant, whatever you want to call client, what can we do to make our house, what we live in, a bit more greener, a bit more climate, actually do something positive. I mean, a lot of people do recycling on a blue bin and purple bottle, whatever, yeah. But what is it we can do as tenants right now to make it a bit better? And we can actually, we can do a bit more what we do now. I mean, number 2, the funding is not going to be available from Boris Johnson. I mean, I've been following COP26 since it started. I've been a climate change for the last 20 years. I mean, all of a sudden, there's a emergency going on. Everyone's coming on board now, different approaches and this, that, the other. And where were you 10 years ago? You heard about climate. Some people were quite vocal then. All of a sudden, right now, everybody getting a bit of funding together, collaboration, You know, another thing as well, I mean, the biggest thing you're going to have retrofitting a property is the gas boiler. The technology hasn't actually caught up with what we want to achieve now. Because if you put the heat pumps on now, change the gas boiler, the heat pump do not as good as the gas boiler, what it is now. So my question is that what can a tenant do to become more greener?
Who wants to take that question?
I can jump in there if you'd like.
Okay.
My start for 10 is yes, Shafiq. I share that frustration that the government announced something like £6 billion for heat pumps, but you know, none of us like insulate Britain's tactics, but actually they are right. You know, putting money into heat pumps, although you know, welcome in that it may drive the technology, the development of the technology which we all need, and make it better value for money, and make them more kind of long-term sustainable, if you want. They really will only benefit better insulated houses anyway. They don't solve that problem. I mean, in terms of a, you know, from a tenancy perspective, I think you know, as I said, and I think others said it is about bringing our customers with us, and to some extent our customers leading us. You know, we want involved customers that will tell us what they want, how this is going to affect their lives, what they are doing now that we can maybe take forward into with other customers, and driving us as landlords to you know, where is our program for decarbonisation, you know, actually owning it and wanting it as customers, and then obviously in the short term, very short term, you know, while we come knocking on the door to say in 6 months' time we're going to retrofit your house in some way, it's the same as everybody else. It's eat less meat, it's turn your heating down, it's put a jumper on, it's put a whatever in your water system to stop using the water, etc., etc. You know, so there's a lot of overlap with us all. Really, we all have to be doing that type of stuff. But yeah, I think there's a real message there about the customer's role, not to just be recipients of this, but actually to help drive that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Peter. There was a question from Anne-Marie. Do you feel comfortable asking that question, Anne-Marie?
Yeah.
Or a comment? Thanks.
I kind of see the link between, so obviously delivering decarbonisation plans is one of the biggest challenges for housing providers at the moment, but alongside that there's the building safety bill and the changes to consumer regulation and the requirement to listen to and act on the customer voice, which almost creates like a perfect storm, because I think that there's probably a risk that housing providers will try to run away with trying to deliver some of the difficult targets in relation to decarbonisation, but may neglect to meet those other elements that are just as vital. So I was just kind of wondering what organisations are doing at the moment to sort of link the three. So that's really my question.
Thank you. Okay, who would like to take that question, Mark, please?
Well, I think probably the honest answer is that we're all probably scratching our heads. I think your analysis that it's a bit of a perfect storm is spot on. Yet there is so much being fired at us. I mean, my career has been in asset management. I can't remember a time where we have had so many new and critical things thrown at us out in one go. As Pete said, I think the building safety issue, it's a big one right now, but it is a relatively short, in terms of dealing with the key issues, it's a relatively near thing to be seeing through. The climate emergency for me is just off the scale in terms of comparison in what we've got to do. And as I said in my presentation, the technical and financial challenges are big enough, but the bigger ones are to do, I think, with taking our communities with us on this journey. And that, I think, then links back to consumer regulation and engaging our customers more widely in what we do. because there are going to be some tensions, huge tensions.
Okay, thank you, Martin. There's a couple of other questions in the chat, and one's around finance and one's around how do you work with across different tenures, so homes that are owned by people. So I think that's really a choice, really. How do we bring in a bit of private finance to this? Because I think acknowledged by Judith that public sector finance is never going to be enough. But I suppose it's also worth recognising that wave 2 and 3 of Social Housing Fund is 800 million. So I think we all need to be in a position to make sure that we take as much of that money as possible and the government doesn't take it back. But I think on the private finance side, any big ideas there? And secondly, around working across tenure. I'm conscious it's 10:30. The option now is you can either go in, have a little break, and then move on to your next session at 11, or we can just keep the chat going for a little bit longer. The next session will start at 11 o'clock. So yeah, if people are happy to stay, then you're more than welcome to. So perhaps one around finance and then one around, and then the second one around working across tenure. Who'd like to start with that one? Those two.
I'll talk about working across tenure, Daniel, if that's
Thank you.
And it's not, yep. I don't have the answers, but I think it's a great question. And I think there is an opportunity there with the Social Housing Decarb Fund. We can bring other tenures along with us on that. Great. I would love to see us as we move into wave 2 and wave 3 and beyond, looking at how we can adopt a placemaking approach, take other social landlords on the estate with us who are working in collaboratively across our sector, but then opening that up into the home ownership where there's leaseholders. We did a really good job of doing that when CESP and CERT were around, however many years ago that was, where we could use the funding and adapt it and bring the other funding streams together to actually, do whole estate retrofits. In order for that to happen, we need to have a platform where people can engage and get involved and, be part of the conversation. Referring back to my presentation about NECO, the retrofit group, one of the aims of that is to do that. But we need more representation on that group from, private ownership, large, landlords, house builders, etc. We need to bring other sectors with us. So yes, it needs to happen, but how we do it, I don't know, unless people come to the table and start talking about it with us. I would say that local authorities have got a part to play in that. They've got the connections, but it's kind of like carrot and stick, how we do it. We need the legislation there. Maybe we need some more direction from government to actually mean that it's not just social landlords who are being asked to deliver on this, but across other sectors.
Yeah, we've got opportunities with, there are different funding streams all being delivered through BEIS, SHDF and HUG, Home Upgrade Grant, being the main two. So we had £800 million announced for SHDF last week, and alongside that 950 million for home upgrade grants, which are primarily focused on the private sector. So yeah, strong partnerships at a local level with the local authorities to be able to bring programs together at a neighbourhood level are essential. I suggest that's going to mean that as housing providers, we're going to have to be less precious about our asset management strategies and be more flexible in how we're prepared to organise our delivery. So we might end up doing work in a different order to what might be purely in our own interest, simply because actually that's going to benefit, that's got a bigger benefit more widely. And again, going back to the biggest challenge I keep banging on about taking our communities with us, I've got this fundamental belief that as a community anchor in a locality where we have a significant number of properties, it's going to be so much easier on a community basis to take forward a transition to a low carbon way of living if we take an inclusive approach. And that doesn't mean to say we're going to pay for it, but actually that we are a major catalyst in taking forward a community approach that is tenure blind effectively, and looks at engagement and behaviours in the same breath as the technical solutions.
Thank you, Martin. Anyone want to grapple with the big one around finance? I know you touched on it, Martin. I mean, I think what you're trying to do with the sort of solar battery is a good example of that, really, where there is private finance around for that, but in regards to that project, it needs to be quite patient finance that's willing to then invest. And I think sometimes probably organisations like yourselves have been approached by energy aggregators and the like to hand over your assets to them. But I think there's been probably a nervousness around that, and sometimes the reward has not been as significant as it should be. So
the risks, the small print has been a barrier as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think how you sort of take greater control over your own, in that regard, energy future for your home, for your tenants and your assets, I think is a key part of that financing for me. How is it a shared endeavour? And maybe I mean yesterday was the big conversation around green financing for climate. So let's see what can come out of that from the sort of private sector side. But okay. Anybody else want to either ask a question or say anything else on what you've heard so far? Okay. Well, thank you so much. Oh, sorry, Lee. Yeah, please go ahead if you put your camera on. If you're.
Yeah, I was just finding the right buttons there.
No problem.
So, Lee Norman, I'm from a local authority in Merseyside. So obviously we've had quite a lot of engagement with RPs in relation to the combined authority submission for the social housing decarb. The question was really about, do the speakers sort of, have they been sort of surprised by how good or how not good the data is on current energy standards of the properties? Because you can have a sort of EPC rating, but measures get done subsequently to that, and areas or you know, maybe even whole estates that you think might be a poor standard aren't necessarily as bad as you think. So when they're actually assessed, they may not actually need the measures, because if we're only striving for, you know, band C at this stage. So the question was really about, you know, how up to date are RP's sort of data sets on energy standards of their stock?
I think that's a brilliant question, because we were 2 years ago completely shocked. Now we're on a journey. We've identified where the gaps are, and particularly that it's so crucial, isn't it, that when works are done to a property, they actually get recorded, and that results in either a recalculation of EPC or SAP, and we just weren't doing it. So we are now. So, you know, that's the whole learning piece, and that then ties into, again, back into the collaborative approach. How do we do that together? And in Greater Manchester, we're starting to talk about having our own assessors, our own pool of assessors, because there seems to be a bit of a dearth of assessors again in the industry. So yeah, I take that point, Lee. I think it's a really good one, and it's we've got an opportunity here. I think, you know, we've got a very long road ahead of us, but it's crucial that we spend these first couple of years understanding not just what we can do and how much it's going to cost, but actually our property data. We need to get it better. We need to understand it better. It needs to inform our plans better, because, you know, as it stands at the minute, it's kitchens, bathrooms, roofs, boilers, etc. And we just work to kind of a computer says, and then we kind of moderate that. Now we need plans around kind of much bigger plans, and data is key to that.